Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is backing legislation that would limit classroom discussions on issues like sexual orientation or gender identity with young students. The Biden administration, however, not too happy about it. Listen to this.
This is not the only bill or the only effort we're seeing across the country to really regulate what students can or cannot read, what they can or cannot learn, and most troubling, who they can or cannot be.
In your view, is this dangerous legislation?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do think that contributes to the shocking levels of suicidal thoughts and suicide attempts among LGBTQ youth.
And LGBTQ activists are dubbing this legislation as Don't Say Gay Bill, and President Biden even calls it hateful. Well, here with reaction is founder and president of Turning Point USA and host of the Charlie Kirk Show, Charlie Kirk. Charlie, good to see you. Welcome back to the show. You know, there's actually several states out there have introduced legislation to create checks and balances for the kind of conversation that teachers can have with elementary school students. We have Arizona, Indiana. They proposed that teachers have to get permission from their parents before they can have these sexual orientation conversations. But as you heard, the left is losing their mind over this, trying to take the parent completely out of these conversations. I mean, that is concerning.
Of course it is. Yeah. And you said the right word, elementary school kids. I mean, these are elementary school kids that are being exposed to incredibly graphic and inappropriate topics. And we were also moved by the California mother recently who accused a group of California teachers of preying on her young daughter and introducing these topics and creating gender confusion and depression and chaos in their family life. There was a work of journalism that was done that exposed the California Teacher Union at an event in Palm Springs, California, admitted they were trying to recruit more students into the LGBT clubs. And this bill is focused, first and foremost, on elementary school kids. Really? This is something that should be left for parents. And I mean, color me shocked. When I was in elementary school and middle school, none of these topics were discussed by your teachers ever. Even in high school, we had to get parental consent forms. And the fact that Pete Buttigieg and the White House is now weighing in on this kind of shows that there's a deeper and really creepy agenda to try to thwart the needs, wants, and concerns of parents and try to replace the family with government.
You know, it's funny that you said that, right? Because what Lyndsay was talking about was this idea of parental consent to have these discussions. To your point, I don't remember ever having the discussion at all. I mean, when I went to school, and I mean, we literally just were like, okay, we had history, math. We had something called life studies or something. We learned about the human body. But there was this story today that I was talking about, Lyndsay, before the show, where in Connecticut, they were talking about this pizza, and they would have slices, and the kids could talk about the things they would do sexually with the different pieces of the pizza. And I'm going, this is not a conversation you have at school. I don't understand why, whether or not the parents shouldn't even be, when I say shouldn't be consenting, they shouldn't have to be. This shouldn't be a subject that you go to school to have. We're falling behind in terms of learning because these are the priorities. And the idea that the Secretary of Transportation is weighing in and saying it's dangerous. The danger is that we're having discussions of this nature in a school that should be focused on English and math and history and science.
That's exactly right, Sean. And I will say this, the sexual education curriculum in some of these states is far more dangerous to these children than COVID. And they want these kids to walk around with masks all day long. Yeah, when you're introducing these topics to a 7-year-old about identity and relationship and your future and how you view the world and view yourself, and you don't do it from a perspective that is reasonable or involving the parent, I would prefer, of course, for it to come from a more religious, Judeo-Christian, natural law-based perspective. But we'll put that aside. Let's just say from a reasonable perspective, a fair perspective, how about one that isn't rooted in like pseudoscience or gender dysphoria, then you're going to have a lot of externalities. In fact, you're going to have entire generations that are confused and also, quite honestly, more depressed, more suicidal, the most medicated generation in history. And so, yeah, it all comes back down to a very simple solution, which is why I find Ron DeSantis' proposal to be not just non-controversial, it's brilliant, which is just leave it to the parents. If the parents want their 6-year-old to learn about the graphic details of things that I won't even say on air here, honestly, but your 6-year-old could be, exposed to it, then so be it. It's really weird. 95% of parents across the country would not support that. 95% of parents will will turn off the Super Bowl halftime show for their 6-year-old, and they should, by the way, because it's probably going to be very graphic sexually. And if you don't want that on your cable news channel, why would you want it in your elementary school? In the 1980s, 1990s, we passed a series of reforms for cable television and network television, and yet we allow our 6-year-olds to be exposed to it.
It's unbelievable. And I mean, the fact that these are elementary students, we're not talking about high school students. These are little kids. We talk about them 6, 7. They shouldn't be having these conversations. The interesting thing is, we talked about this earlier in the show, the Department of Homeland Security has put out this misinformation threat saying that there's misinformation on COVID. But I want to talk about that because when you talk about the schools and what's being taught, there's this ideology now from the left that misinformation is a dissenting view. So if you have a dissenting view, then it's misinformation and you're a terrible person. If you don't want your kids to learn about sex when they're 6 years old, then you are spreading misinformation. This is hate speech. And they're switching the language from actually what is misinformation to just being a dissenting view.
That's exactly right. And I mean, they use that term misinformation or fact checking or disinformation as a way to try to suppress speech, as a way to try to stop people from being able to pursue the truth. You know, there's an old expression that says, I would much rather have answers that could be questioned than questions that can't be answered. I mean, or vice versa, which very well means, like, if you have something where you can't ask a question about it without it being labeled disinformation, then you're definitely trending in the wrong direction. But let me also say this, that this is nothing new when it comes to this kind of graphic sexual education that's happening in our schools. When I mean graphic, I mean it's so graphic that if you saw that, if you aired it right now on this channel, you'd be fined by the FCC. If you aired what actually 6-year-olds are being exposed to in certain states like Georgia, you would be fined and possibly even sued for graphic pornography on air. But the left has always been in the business of trying to take innocence away from children. They always have wanted to do this. I don't really know what the inclination for that is. I don't know what the motive is, but children deserve to have an upbringing that is in alignment with a natural maturation process, which also means honoring their parents and being able to learn about these topics in a way that is rooted in wisdom and prudence, not one that is reckless, not one that also glorifies potential changes to your body, such as gender changes or chemical castration, that could be irreversible damage to a young person. And one last thought on this. In Washington, in the state of Oregon, you can get gender reassignment surgery funded by taxpayers without parental consent. There is an entire agenda behind this.
I know. Charlie Kirk, always great to see you. Thank you so much.